Africa, a vast continent teeming with life and resources. In the late 19th century, European powers turned their greedy eyes towards this land. This period became known as the Scramble for Africa. Driven by industrial ambitions and a thirst for power, European nations carved up the continent. They drew borders with little regard for the existing ethnic and cultural landscapes. This mad dash for colonies had devastating consequences for Africa. It left a legacy of exploitation and artificial divisions that continue to shape the continent today. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 formalized this division of Africa. European powers gathered to establish rules for claiming African territories. This conference essentially gave European nations carte blanche to seize land. They only needed to establish effective occupation. This meant demonstrating control over the territory and its people. This period marked a dark chapter in human history. It was a time when the principles of self-determination and sovereignty were trampled upon. This scramble for Africa was driven by a complex interplay of factors. Industrializing European nations needed raw materials. They sought these in Africa's rich lands. Rubber, diamonds, gold, and other valuable commodities fueled European factories and economies. Beyond resources, European powers sought new markets for their manufactured goods. They viewed Africa as a captive market for their products. The scramble was also fueled by political rivalries. European nations competed for prestige and power on the global stage. Acquiring colonies was seen as a measure of a nation's strength. The more colonies a nation possessed, the more powerful it was perceived to be. This competition for colonies created a climate of suspicion and hostility among European powers. Italy was a latecomer to this scramble for Africa. Unified in 1861, Italy was a relatively young nation. It was eager to prove itself on the world stage. Driven by a desire for prestige and economic opportunities, Italy joined the race for colonies. However, by the time Italy entered the fray, most of Africa had already been claimed by other European powers. Italy initially focused its attention on the Horn of Africa. This strategically important region offered access to the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. The declining Ottoman Empire controlled much of this region, offering an opportunity for Italian expansion. In 1869, an Italian company purchased a small port town called Assab on the Red Sea coast. This seemingly insignificant acquisition marked the beginning of Italy's colonial venture in Eritrea. Italy's ambitions in the Horn of Africa were not limited to Eritrea. They also eyed Ethiopia, an ancient kingdom with a long history of independence. Ethiopia, under Emperor Menelik II, represented a significant obstacle to Italy's expansionist goals. Italy's colonial ambitions would soon clash with Ethiopian resistance. This would lead to a defining chapter in both nations' histories. Italy's colonial ambitions were driven by a number of factors. The desire for prestige played a significant role. Italy, eager to assert its place among the European powers, believed that acquiring colonies was essential for achieving great power status. Economic factors were also at play. Italy, like other European nations, sought access to raw materials and new markets. The Horn of Africa, with its strategic location and untapped resources, seemed to offer these opportunities. The acquisition of Assab was a pivotal moment in Italy's colonization of Eritrea. Originally a small trading post, Assab was strategically located on the Red Sea coast. It provided Italy with a foothold in the Horn of Africa. This acquisition, however, was not without controversy. The local Afar Sultan protested the Italian purchase. He claimed ownership of the land. This dispute foreshadowed the conflicts to come between Italy and the indigenous populations of Eritrea. Despite the protests, Italy consolidated its hold over Assab. They expanded the port facilities and established a military presence. Assab became a base for further Italian expansion into the Eritrean interior. Italian explorers, missionaries and traders began to venture inland. They made contact with various Eritrean ethnic groups. These interactions, often marked by misunderstandings and conflicting interests, would lay the groundwork for future conflicts. The acquisition of Assab had a significant impact on the local Afar population. The Afar, a nomadic pastoralist people, had long inhabited the coastal regions of Eritrea. The arrival of the Italians disrupted their traditional way of life. The Italians claimed ownership of grazing lands. They restricted the Afar's movements. This displacement and dispossession would sow seeds of resentment among the Afar. It would fuel resistance against Italian rule. The Italian presence in Assab also had economic implications. The port town became a hub for trade. It connected the Red Sea to the Eritrean interior. Italian merchants began to exploit the region's resources. They traded in ivory, coffee, and other commodities. This trade, while enriching the Italians, often came at the expense of the local population. Section 4. The Treaty of Wuchale. Seeds of Discord. In 1889, Italy signed the Treaty of Wuchale with Emperor Menelik II of Ethiopia. This treaty, seemingly innocuous, would become a point of contention. It would ultimately lead to war. The treaty, written in both Italian and Amharic, the language of the Ethiopian court, contained discrepancies. The Italian version made Ethiopia an Italian protectorate. The Amharic version, however, recognized Ethiopian sovereignty. This discrepancy in translation was no accident. Italy, eager to expand its colonial possessions, deliberately used ambiguous language to deceive Menelik. They sought to establish legal grounds for their control over Ethiopia. Menelik, however, was not easily manipulated. When he became aware of the discrepancy, he denounced the treaty. He declared Ethiopia's independence from any foreign power. The Treaty of Wuchale had far-reaching consequences. It marked a turning point in Italian-Ethiopian relations. The treaty's ambiguity created a climate of mistrust and suspicion between the two nations. Italy, feeling cheated out of its perceived dominance, prepared for war. They sought to impose their will by force. Menelik, determined to defend Ethiopia's sovereignty, rallied his people. He prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The Treaty of Wuchale also had significant implications for Eritrea. Eritrea, situated between Italian-controlled territory and Ethiopia, became a battleground. The treaty's collapse ignited a conflict that would engulf the region. Eritreans would be caught in the crossfire. They would be forced to choose sides in a war not of their making. Section 5. Italian expansion and Eritrean resistance. Emboldened by the Treaty of Wuchale, Italy embarked on a campaign of expansion in Eritrea. They sought to consolidate their control over the region. Italian forces, equipped with superior weaponry, moved inland. They encountered resistance from various Eritrean ethnic groups. The Eritreans, though divided by language and culture, shared a common enemy. They fought fiercely to defend their land and way of life. One of the most notable acts of Eritrean resistance occurred at the Battle of Coatit in 1895. Eritrean forces, led by Bakta Haigos, inflicted heavy casualties on the advancing Italian army. This victory, though ultimately a tactical retreat, demonstrated the Eritreans' determination to resist Italian rule. It showed that the conquest of Eritrea would not be an easy feat. Despite facing stiff resistance, the Italians pressed on. They employed a combination of military force and diplomacy to expand their control. They exploited divisions among Eritrean ethnic groups. They played one group against another. This strategy of divide and conquer proved effective in weakening Eritrean resistance. It allowed the Italians to consolidate their hold over the region. The Italian occupation had a profound impact on Eritrean society. Traditional power structures were disrupted. Local chiefs who resisted Italian rule were often deposed or replaced. The Italians imposed their own administrative system. They introduced new laws and regulations. This disruption of traditional governance systems had long-term consequences for Eritrea. It sowed the seeds for future conflicts over power and representation.